agreement and the activities that followed it. And when we started to do some of the more difficult work of interviewing survivors for different kinds of experiences that they had, tragically and unfortunately, various kinds of abuse, a beautiful person entered my life. She came all the way from out here to Keewatin, Kenora. I was introduced to her there at the law office, and Doug said, "You two are going to be working together." And so we would, and we did. And we drove the highways and byways of northwestern Ontario interviewing survivors, me doing the legal work, June providing support for obviously some of the more sensitive subject matter that survivors would face, and bossing me around the whole time. And I loved it. She still does it today. Folks, first of all, I want to just recognize what's happening here, how appreciative we are. I wanted to get here this morning so I could hear and see a couple of presentations and engage that. I love to spend time at these conferences. And June's, Chief Black's leadership here is exceptional, and it's entirely consistent with what is happening in Canada right now. Harold, one of the smartest people I know, will always provide thought-provoking, sometimes sobering, but always underpinned by positive perspectives on the opportunity. And I appreciate your friendship long time, Harold. Your guidance and your wisdom has informed the roles that I have had historically with the federal government and the provincial government now. Harold, no question about it, we've fallen short in some respects. But your call today for us all to take up responsibilities in this is the major pivot point. Because here is what's happening, particularly in the last year, more certainly than I can remember. And certainly I qualify that by saying that the FNMPC, Steve, I loved your presentation today. The work that Harold has been doing, Manny Jules has been doing some great work. But very quietly and very importantly, across this country, First Nations have been organizing their economic capacity. Different provinces and territories are hosting First Nations-led summits and conferences just like this. And it's important to understand its impact on what's happening with governments, particularly under the leadership of Premier Ford. As we took stock of the different conferences that we were attending, the major projects that were in front of us, we knew a couple of important things. One, they could not be done without full partnership with First Nations communities and or their businesses. That advancing economic and community development through collaborative partnerships and solutions is what would in fact drive the success of projects that would be in the best interests of the province of Ontario, and in some instances, depending on that project, the country of Canada. So moved was the Premier that last year he said, "Greg, you know, you've been my utility infielder. You have covered just about every conceivable cabinet position I had as we built up capacity. But this First Nations opportunity needs your undivided attention. So we're going to grow your ministry into a central agency, and we are going to add economic reconciliation to the title, because in our view, based on what we were seeing and experiencing, economic reconciliation was the next chapter to be written in the journey of economic reconciliation for us all. I hope, and I haven't talked to anybody so far that dispels that or refutes it. And for the province of Ontario, economic reconciliation has taken many different forms, but overarching it were two key things. One was the settlement of historic grievances. They manifest themselves in land and flood and treaty claims. I was in Sault Ste. Marie yesterday celebrating the 75-year treaty of the Robinson-Huron. But more importantly, the implementation and the go forward of that treaty that put a $5 billion settlement in play, the largest treaty settlement in the history of the world that we could find. In the past 6.5 years that we've been government, we know that we have settled more flooding and land claims and treaty claims than any government in the province of Ontario. I don't mean to imbue my presentation here today with political stripes. These are just facts. The second important component of economic reconciliation had entirely consistent with what this summit is presenting, a sharpened focus on economic activities. And I learned a lot. Just after this last election, I was in London, England, where Harold, myself, Rob Brandt from McCarthy Tetro, Ernie Daniels from the First Nations Finance Authority, First Nations leaders in business, finance, and business law. The London Stock Exchange, arguably the seat of economic theory the world over and economic activity, was interested in what First Nations businesses were doing in this country. Notice that even though the Toronto Stock Exchange, which has more IPO offerings in things like mining and resource development, as much and as good a work that they do, it was actually the London Stock Exchange, Harold, that was more interested in what was going on. That's a wake-up call to us all, for us all, and that is an opportunity. Steve Saddleback, I appreciated your presentation here today, but we attended the First Nations Major Project Coalition conference. I've been to 3 or 4, I guess 4 of them now. This one blew the doors off of any one prior. 1,800 people, former prime ministers, business leaders, predominantly First Nations. This has a new complex to it that we have to start to understand and embrace. We had realized, I got to Saskatoon and attended the Indigenous business gathering that put 1,200 people in the room. It was a bit of a going back home for me. My mom, my father, or my grandpa, my great-grandmother, all born out in Saskatchewan. It became very clear to me as a young man when I was working as a nurse out there that this province was doing it differently, whether it's additions to reserves, the prominence of First Nations executives in large global companies like Cameco, First Nations owned and operated businesses that were driving economic surges and activity in places like Prince Albert and Saskatoon, was how things were going to get done. If you don't want to understand and embrace First Nations economic opportunities, you're going to miss out. And so as a government, we didn't want to miss that opportunity. We wanted to embrace it. And so, as recently as this last budget following the election, we had several key announcements which I believe would pre-position us to create an overarching opportunity to be full partnerships, to create real access to capital, but more importantly, to Harold's point, to start to break that access to capital down, understand how returns. Don't get me wrong, I don't mind not-for-profit businesses, but there's nothing wrong with First Nations businesses being involved in for-profit industry. And taking a look at things like the Indigenous Opportunities Fund and trying to understand how we could look at Indigenous sovereign wealth funds and different things like that. And so we would announce in this past summer $3 billion for the Indigenous Opportunities Fund to break down the barriers for access to capital in getting involved in major projects. We would introduce scholarship funds to train and professionalize, build capacity for young First Nations people to be involved and see a path to the C-suite of major companies, learn and create opportunities for them to build them. And it starts small, right? Twinning the highway in my neck of the woods out there, supporting First Nations companies supported by their communities, member communities, to now become a road construction company that will start to build the next segment of the twinned highway. A skills development fund, economic development funds, working with AFNIDA, who I will be with next week in Thunder Bay, to create economic diversification opportunities and officers' real capacity in their communities. These kinds of activities, of course, could not go forward without including a very good and solid relationship with the Chiefs of Ontario. Abram Benedict, Regional Chief Benedict, who will be following me, will talk more about it. But a couple of years ago, we entered into an agreement with them to engage a number of very important economic and business activities. They are, the purposes of today's discussion very briefly, included things like supply chain mapping and supporting economic development activities and business growth through funds that we would either co-administer or they would administer from their organization. These investments and partnerships led us to where we are today, and why I wanted to be here today, amongst other reasons. And that is to celebrate a key milestone on the First Nations-led business directory. Led by the Chiefs of Ontario and supported by the Province of Ontario, work is now underway to verify more than 1,000 First Nations businesses already registered and to facilitate a network that taps into public and private procurement needs and opportunities in a multitude of sectors. We know how to do this. We have seen it in different parts of the country. We have extraordinary First Nations business leaders. And in Ontario, if I could say respectfully, I feel sometimes that we're lagging, but it's this Business Economic Summit, June, that is brought to the fore that we can do it, and we will do it. And I said to June later next year, we'll go to Saskatoon to the Indigenous Business Gathering. We'll learn together how we can transpose that into parts of Ontario. Because Ontario, we big, right? We drive a lot of economic activity. I know those Western Canadians love to tease us about the Toronto Maple Leafs and their failures and about how we think we're big. But give us a break here. There's 14 million people living in this country, in this province. And we see an extraordinary opportunity to do that. We want a First Nations-led economy, and we're a big fan of what you're doing here today and what's happening across this country. Let's keep doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Greg Rickford. I'm the member of Provincial Parliament for the Great Kenora Rainy River riding. It's a privilege and an honor to serve my constituents and to be here today to support the important work you're doing. Thank you for this opportunity.
Okay, everyone. It also is my great honor to welcome a distinguished leader whose dedication to Indigenous governance, advocacy, and community development continues to shape the future for First Nations across Ontario. Chief Abram Benedict serves as the Regional Chief for the Chiefs of Ontario, representing and supporting 133 First Nations across the province. He is the first Haudenosaunee person to hold this position in the organization's 50-year history. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Chief Abram Benedict.
Sego, good afternoon. You forgot to mention the most best region, 133 First Nations across the best region in Canada. It's a great pleasure to join you this afternoon again. I was here this morning and provided some remarks, and today to talk about, to provide a bit of a background and some information and share in this success. So today the Chiefs of Ontario, along with the Government of Ontario, is announcing a business directory, Ontario's first Indigenous First Nation-led directory that the Chiefs of Ontario has been working so closely with the Province of Ontario on. This is a milestone in strengthening the First Nation businesses. This morning I talked about the importance of of community businesses and the anchor that they have. We have many small businesses, many large businesses through our territories, and development of this business directory will help close the gaps that exist, but also, as the times that we have now and the times that we are in, there's no more important times now to secure our jurisdiction and sovereignty, and that includes our businesses as well. And this business directory that we have at the Chiefs of Ontario will allow, and as Minister Rickford mentioned, and who I want to give a big shout out to him as well for his championship on this, as we have been working with the province on a number of initiatives to strengthen not only our businesses, but other areas that support the First Nations across this region. And we recognize that the improvement of economic viability of our businesses was essential, and that as part of this registry program, there will be an upcoming program that we have pre-registered already, and we'll work through a process where businesses are verified. We have seen lots of controversy in the last little while around businesses taking opportunity to set asides or contracts that are designed for First Nation businesses, when at the end of the day, some of these businesses weren't even owned by our people. And so we're going to continue to make sure that we're verifying, working with leadership, that these are businesses that the community supports and are not people taking advantage of those opportunities that exist. I think it's fundamentally important, and part of the development that we will have will embrace the principles of OCAP. We know how important that is, the data and the sovereignty that we have. Yes, there's always concern and controversy around when people have to give information, including our businesses. Many of our businesses don't want others to know, and that's fine. But we want to make sure that as the governments of Canada, the governments of Ontario, continue to strengthen the Canadian economy, that our businesses are part of that. And this directory will provide access to them, verified information of our community by our community leadership in partnership. And so this certificate program, or the certifying program, will be led in collaboration with the leadership to make sure that we can stand by the business directory that we have been working so hard to make sure that it meets all standards, but also is accessible to our businesses. And so for the last several months, our team at the Chiefs of Ontario has been working, has had a number of engagement sessions to bring out the business leaders, to pre-register, and so that we can begin the validation process. I'm confident that as we roll this out today, and part of the work that we're doing with the government of Ontario under the leadership of our friend Greg Rickford, who I know, as he mentioned earlier in some of his speakings, we don't always agree, but there's one thing that we can agree on, that First Nation businesses are the backbone of many of our communities, and we need to be able to support them however we can. We have other initiatives that we're working on. This registry is extremely important. I get lots of calls from individuals saying, do you know a person involved in this? Do you know First Nations involved in this? Do you know companies that can help us in these areas? Well, I've spent a lot of time with many leadership across this region. I don't know everybody. I don't know all the businesses. And this will be a tool, an opportunity, so businesses can access, governments can access, and verify at the same time. So with that, I want to say Yamago Miigwech to the government for continuing to support our businesses, because we've been pushing hard, and our leadership has been saying that to us. We need ways to support the economy. We need ways to ensure that our local businesses are being supported by not only our Chief and Council, but also by the governments. And that's some of the work that we're doing here today. So, Miigwech Yamagoa, and I look forward to rolling this program out and the many more initiatives to support the economies of our First Nations. Now,
Okay, everyone. I feel like we have a little bit of a gap. We finished a bit early, which is great news because we're going to start a little bit early. We have a short presentation by Sean McEachran. Sean, did you want to do that now, or did you want to do it at 1 o'clock?